Welcome, everybody. Dr. Josh Long here with AME Podcast, my quest to what I call continuing music education and continuing adult learning in the music field. AME Podcast has been very fun. Have a bunch out there. So if you're seeing just this particular one, make sure to file through because we're been releasing podcasts about 2 a month. This podcast is actually sponsored by Art and Music Emporium, serving artistic excellence. That's the business that I belong to. We fix instruments and we also do things such as performance initiatives. So we're doing a band down in Wildwood, New Jersey, and also one in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and also a few tuba Christmases. All three of those ensembles are something that you can join to because we actually do rehearsals right before and then do the performances. The bigger band ones are the day before, and we do the actual concert the next day. So it's definitely doable from wherever you are. All these groups are very fun and get active members out there, talk about history, and well, hey, just have a great time. So do check that out at www.artmusicemporium.com. We're also on YouTube, as you see, so please subscribe to our channel. We're on Facebook as well, Art and Music Emporium or Joshua E. Long. So do like us there. And we also do have a Patreon account in case you're interested in supporting us in any way. All the money and proceeds go right towards people continuing making music beyond the classroom. So I'm so excited. Our guest here tonight, Bill Rehrig, actually was already on AME Podcast, and he doesn't know this, but he's actually our second guest to come back. Well, not second, first guest to come back the second time. That's what I wanted to say. So we're really excited to have him here. We're actually going to talk. He's a music educator, very into music history. If you haven't seen the first podcast, and we're going to actually talk about marches, which is kind of the staple of the band world. So, Bill, why don't you take it away?
Okay, well, first of all, thanks for having me on again. I'm glad I didn't offend so many people that you didn't want to put me on again. I like to call this, Where Have All the Marches Gone? If you look at the programs of most every band
Mhm.
that's high school level or higher, except for the uh, service bands, you rarely see more than one or two marches on the program.
Mhm.
And the problem then becomes, do the directors that direct these bands know what a march is all about and how to play it properly? One of the problems that stems all the way back to Gilmore and Sousa is that the published versions of marches are not really annotated with marks that
Mhm.
explain how these marches are to be played. Basically, you have several different indications: mezzo forte, crescendo, fortissimo, forte, and that's about it. Sousa was famous for playing his marches much differently than the published version indicated. And he made a comment that when you played his march, you ought to take a look at it and figure out how to do it so it becomes a little symphonic poem rather than just a march to move people around. Marches originally began as people movers.
Mhm.
The troops back in the day before electronics and electrics had to get troops from here to there in an orderly fashion. So in the real early days, fife and drums moved troops from here to there in an organized way. And then, of course, the band came in and did that. And then up to World War II, marches were basically two ways focused. One, the march was written for a military function or occasion, or it was written as in honor of somebody. They dedicated to somebody. World War II came along, and once World War II ended, around the beginning of the 50s, the march fell in disfavor, mainly because it was adjoined to the military, and then military was not a good idea because of where the war went and so forth. Then marches became a thing of the concert stage. And what usually happened was composers began writing marches, but they called them concert marches. And I've seen examples of old Sousa and Fillmore and other good composers' marches reprinted, calling it a concert march. Like Barnum and Bailey's favorite, concert march.
Hmm.
The concert march idea was that it brought the march indoors, but it also brought the articulation style into the style of a tone poem or an overture rather than that of the original true march. Marches then became sort of old hat and sort of like stamped out of a given formula.
Okay.
Marches are not intended to be played larghetto or largo. Marches, because of their style, are to be played separately and with vigor. Susie used to say a good march should make a man with a wooden leg want to get up and march. And so the thing about marches, for those of you people who are directing bands today, is you've got to understand what a march is all about and how to emulate the strengths of each march so that it can be really transformed into a miniature tone poem. Now, I've got a march here that was 1896.
Okay.
And there it is, Up the Street by Robert G. Morse, published by Ramsdell in 1896. Now, if you look at that march, it's a fortissimo beginning, then it's mezzo forte, the first strain repeated, second strain piano with a crescendo to fortissimo, repeated the same way, and then the interlude is fortissimo all the way. Then it goes into a clarinet and piccolo interlude where you got fortissimo all the way, and the last strain, fortissimo all the way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's not very interesting. Plus, the big thing is it does not describe the title of the march. Up the Street is what happens when you're standing on the sidewalk and the band approaches you coming up the street. And I apologize. I wanted to have a notated example on here, but I was unable to scan it.
Okay.
If I were doing this march, I'd have the fortissimo beginning. The first strain would start at mezzo forte, go up to maybe a good forte at the first ending, and repeat that. Second strain starts piano, crescendo, but I wouldn't go to fortissimo right away. I'd make the fortissimo at the first ending and crescendo up to the fortissimo at the first ending. Then you repeat fortissimo, and then you begin decrescending back to piano. Next is the fortissimo interlude, and you get down to the clarinets and piccolo. Here's where the up the street really happens. You start soft, crescendo to the first ending, repeat fortissimo, decrescendo to the second ending. Then you hit the last line, fortissimo. So with those dynamic changes, first of all, it describes the march's title better. Second of all, there's more variety to it. It's not as blandly performed. And third of all, with especially in the clarinet and piccolo strain there, if those woodwind players play that very staccato, it's an emulation of the old fife and drum band. So there is a way to make an ordinary 1896 march into a little symphonic tone poem. So that's an example. Now, there are certain tricks, like with a lot of marches, the first time through the last strain, bring the clarinets down an octave and let the counter melody show through. and then the second time bring them up to where they're written. Um, you've got to look at marches as a piece of symphonic music, because otherwise they become sort of like hack jobs. You know,
Hmm.
let's play it loud so the guys can hear us all the time. Well, that's about as interesting as listening to a band that's got nothing but guitars and electric saxophones and ukuleles.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you just, it's actually, it becomes monotonous. Now, one of the problems that happens with marches, with directors that really aren't in tune with what a march really is all about, is that they become throwaways in the rehearsal process.
Hmm.
Spend hours of time on the overture or the symphony or a solo or whatever, and the marches are like either warm-ups or played at the end of the rehearsal just to make sure. It's all like a run through,
Hmm.
not really any kind of a detailed examination of what's going on musically. Therefore, marches are becoming very, I don't want to say inaccurately, but very cavalierly played.
Hmm.
And it doesn't sound like the band is really into it. And you know, nothing at marches, accent are meant to be felt, not just heard.
Hmm.
You know, if you were ever on the stage with the Marine Band, as I've been, you can actually feel the accents in a play, in a piece, like the Chimes of Liberty, for instance, because there's really power coming from all those instruments, not just the drums. So that's the kind of stuff that led Susan to say a great march should make a man with a wooden leg want to get up and march.
Hmm.
So, you know, I'm interested in good music. I don't like it when somebody says a band plays good band music. No, that's not right. A band plays good music.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean it has to be for the band. For example, which is a better piece of music for the band to play? Berlioz's Funeral and Triumphal Symphony or his Roman Carnival Overture? Which of those two is a better piece of music, even in the band transcription?
Hmm.
So there's another theme about bands that keeps growing inside the profession. That is, oh, we've got to make sure it was written for band. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? One of the most frequently written things originally for band is marches. I don't know of any march that was written for an orchestra, quick step march that was written for an orchestra, that was transcribed for a band to play. Now we have marches that were transcribed, like March Slav and the Rakotsi March by Berlioz, but Sousa's marches were written for band and then transcribed for orchestra. So if you want to play original music for band, marches are right there.
Hmm.
So, you know, one of the big things that I think is wrong with parts of our profession is A, prejudice. Don't want to play that because of whatever. Or B, not knowing the repertoire. Every
Hmm.
band director is prisoner of the pieces he was taught and played in high school and college. And for example, if that person never played anything by Claire Grundman, like the second suite or whatever, he doesn't know that piece of music.
Hmm.
And so that's not part of his repertoire. And the only way he gets in touch with it is if he hears somebody else play it and he says, well, that sounds good. I'll try it. So I don't know what repertoire classes are in colleges today, but if I were teaching one, it would run the gamut. I mean, there's so many good, great composers that wrote marches. I mean, you got Sousa, you got Fillmore, you got Goldman, you got D.W. Reeves, you've got J.J. Richards, and that's Carl King,
Hmm.
and and then Leonard Smith is one too. And that's just 5 or 6 guys out of maybe 25 or 30 that were really great and were played a lot.
Hmm.
And so what can be done about this? Well, we have to somehow reach out to the directors and expose them to this kind of repertoire.
Hmm. Well, hey, I have a couple questions. I know, and you bring up a great comment about marches. I mean, definitely, everything I've learned and, you shared with me. I mean, obviously, marches were, as you just said, created for bands. So one thing I wanted to go back to what you were saying. Like you went right away, you showed us the one march, and you were discussing a little bit of what you do for dynamics. What other studying do you do, or what other things do you do to make it feel like you mentioned a comment like a tone poem or putting,
Well,
more the symphonic
so
feel
that
to it.
that
Like what do you
that
what do you do?
depends entirely on the musicianship of the conductor.
Uh-huh.
If a conductor knows about dynamics and how to make a piece of music speak beyond the notes,
Mm-hmm.
if a conductor knows how to capitalize on the really beautiful parts of the march, those kinds of things are all innate of the composer. You can't really take a course on that. You got to
Right,
be a
right,
musician to figure that out.
right.
And you just see one of the things that upset me was years ago. This goes back to probably when Josh Long was about 4. Um, I went up to a publisher and I asked them for the miniature scores of their new pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Well, we didn't publish them." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, band directors want recordings; they don't want music anymore."
Right.
I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, most of them can't read the score without hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
Therein lies the problem.
Yep. Yep.
Therein lies the problem." See, you look at these orchestra composers and conductors who have this pristine knowledge and can look at a score, orchestra score, and see what's going on and figure out what to do with this and that. Band directors are no less than that in terms of what they need to be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that even goes for the contemporary band works, like
Mm-hmm.
something by Julie Giroux or Vittorio Giannini, or even the Hindemith Symphony for band.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, the director has to be a musician to be able to look at that and see what the
Yep.
potential for that march is.
Yeah. And then that's very well said because I always feel like just like how you say, and I know I don't want to say this, wrong because I know usually we play a lot of the same marches, like a lot of different bands, but we have the march books, right? And so for example, I'm thinking a community band right now where you had your
Right.
your red book, we're going to do this march. And you're right, we never spent any time on it other than we might have played it at a performance. We spent the rest of the time working on other pieces and it's like I agree. Like it's how you want to get into that music and hear what the sounds are. It's not just, and just like you said, kind of you want to make the blend, the sound, and I feel like it's a little bit and your example is great with dynamics, but it's more than just the dynamics, I
Oh
think,
yeah, sure. Yeah, well, see that's just how you can take that up the street march
Mhm.
and do some simple dynamic changes to really bring it alive.
Right. Yeah. And I know, like I said, that's a very simple, like very quick way of looking at it. But like, I think about that like more how much you bring up a great point, how much we spend on other pieces, other band pieces or other, other works. And then we just play this march. Okay, we're just gonna play it down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, and I feel like, I mean, if I may ask, like what kind of things do you do to kind of study some of those of the scores of a march? You brought that up for a second. Like, what do you do to kind of get into it a little bit, if I may pick your brain a little bit.
Well, I start with the solo cornet part or the score if there is one.
Okay.
And I look and see, first of all, where the soprano melody's dominant and where the lower instrument melody is dominant.
Okay.
I then look at the dynamics and I look for boredom.
Okay.
Play the same melody twice fortissimo. Well, that's not really all that creative. Then, if available, I'll listen to a good recording and see what they do.
Okay. Okay.
And then I evaluate the title. Like, for instance, you'd play Nobles in the Mystic Shrine
Hmm.
differently than you would play The Thunderer,
Hmm.
just because of the character of the title.
Hmm.
And you take that into consideration, and then you design the march like your musicianship tells you that it would be good to do. And then what you have to do, and this is like drudge work, but you got to take the printed parts and you got to annotate them hand by hand for each of the instrument parts
Hmm.
so that everybody has the same notations on the
Hmm.
stand, and they all can then look at them and see what you want. Then, of course, you got to make sure that they give you that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then the other thing is developing a sense among your players of what march style is.
Okay. Hmm.
You know, the comment I made about that flute and piccolo thing and up the street, that's got to be played extremely staccato.
Hmm.
And, marches are to be played, especially quick step marches, are to be played in a style that's the notes are detached.
Okay.
I don't remember seeing a slur in any march that I've played
Hmm.
like that. And so, you know, a march is supposed to be a crisp, wooden leg good man marching along rather than a dowager looking at the TV and swooning over. Oh gosh, they're coming up the street now.
Right. So one thing you mentioned this kind of march style. Do you describe the march style being just more, I mean, you made the obviously comparison of being staccato rather than slurs, but how would you describe a march style? Let me ask that. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously I would think it would be moving. You know what I mean? That would be one thing because you want to keep people, faster tempo, obviously.
Well, the march style is a style that involves a number of different givens.
Okay.
First, separation of notes.
Okay.
Second, you don't want to play a whole strain at the same dynamic level.
Hmm.
Third, you want to make sure that the drums don't overshadow the dominant instrument melody. And that a lot of times happen when the lower brass have it, especially when the lower brass is weaker than
Hmm.
the upper instruments.
Hmm.
Third, you want to make sure that the music is played like it's going somewhere
Hmm.
and not just sitting on the stage with no movement. The music has to have motion to it and going. And I'm not talking about motion about quick notes, but motion about dynamics and verve and character.
Okay.
So, a march is a very motivational and engaging piece for the people.
Hmm.
I was listening to a Marine band concert years ago live, and they played a Beethoven march and then a piece written on that march, and then the Carl Husa music for Prague and somebody's percussion concerto for percussion. And at the end of the concert, they burst into Semper Fidelis. And
Hmm.
this old guy behind me says, "Oh gosh, the concert finally started." See, I mean, one of the things about a band concert
Hmm.
is that it should not be a dormant uh, siesta kind of experience.
Right, right, right.
It should be interesting, varied, and it should spark enthusiasm when the people leave the
Hmm.
theater. Not because they say, "Oh, thank goodness it's over," but because, "Wow, that was great." When they
Right.
go play again,
Yeah.
you know, and so many band concerts adopt the genre of the orchestra in that it's thoughtful music, and
Hmm.
and we've got to get deeply involved in this. And usually they don't do that musically; they do it in ways that really don't speak to the people much.
Right, right. Yeah, well, and I think what you're bringing up is a good point. It's like the entertainment side of it, and especially with marches being an entertainment rather than just being a, some like you said in the beginning, more than just a people mover. Because
Yeah,
I feel like, that entertainment level. I mean, like I know we can talk about the most popular one, right? Stars and Stripes Forever, right? But there's something to say about that people know it, people kind of expect to hear it at certain times of the year for obvious reasons, like Fourth of July and all those kind of things. But I feel it's like they connect to it, they
yeah,
clap to it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's
yeah. Speaking of the Stars and Stripes, with marches, especially marches that were written some years ago, you
hmm.
want to get to the original edition if you can.
Hmm.
Somebody at either church or presser decided to put trumpet fanfares in the first trio strain
Hmm.
of Stars and Stripes. That's not Sousa. Sousa did not ever put them in. As a matter of fact, Sousa never ever in all the programs that Paul Byerly and I found played Stars as the final number of the concert.
Hmm.
It was always halfway through the second part, usually as an encore.
Hmm.
And so, authenticity is another thing that you need to be aware of.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, because let's face it, there's been a series of marches published by Carl Fisher, and I won't go any further than that, that say it's this march, and there's the introduction, and then a repeated trio, and that's it.
Hmm.
Well, that's like saying, "Hey, here's my sister," but you just see her head.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I
Very.
mean, see,
Yeah.
it's all about music and musicianship.
Yep.
And one of the things that you just brought up, which sort of strikes with nerve with me, is that the bands and their directors a lot of times are afraid to entertain people.
Hmm. Yep.
They won't look at us as serious if we're entertaining them.
Mhm.
Um, I think it was Charles Barnhouse wrote a piece under the pen name of Jim Fisk,
Okay.
and it's a trombone smear where the trombones, go out in and out with their slide and make smeary sounds. Called "Somewhere a Cow is Bawling." On that word is spelled Bawling.
Hmm.
That's a piece of entertainment,
Hmm.
and it belongs on a program at times. I mean, if if you look at what Bob Howe used to call windy assembly programs,
Hmm.
there's really not a whole lot there that's entertaining at all.
Right.
Uh, let's make people more musically aware. Well, okay, how you going to do that when, first of all, they don't understand the musical language it was written in, and two, if they stare at the belly button long enough, well, they see the lint. And let's face it, even when you go to a New York Philharmonic concert, you go there and you get entertained in a way that's not the same as the entertainment you get from Springsteen. but bands have abandoned entertainment because they feel that that's too common,
Hmm.
too demeaning. When in fact, if people don't come to your concerts, that's because they're not that entertaining. I mean, let's face it, given that they even play well. All right.
Right, right. Hmm. Sure.
So um, I've already performed and heard concerts of an hour and a half that were nothing but marches.
Hmm.
Now, some of them obviously were transcriptions, like um, the March from the Love of Three Oranges by
Hmm.
Prokofiev, or some other transcriptions like that. But even with that, pardon me, you can go through the March repertoire for band
Hmm.
and see all different kinds of marches.
Right.
But a Graffula march is a whole lot different than a J.J. Richards march,
Hmm.
than a
Yep.
Sousa march, than a
Yep.
Leonard Smith march. I mean, they're so stylistically different,
Yep.
but yet they're within the same form.
Hmm.
And there's a great source for um, finding these original marches. You go into your browser, type Robert Hoe, Hoe, Robert Hoe music collection, hit on that. That'll bring up the Robert Hoe music collection. You click on that, and it'll bring up a page, and it says discover the collection.
Hmm.
You go to that collection and you search either for a composer in quotes or for a March title in quotes, and that'll bring that music up.
Hmm.
So, for example, you can get the original. Well, for example, I got that Up the Street March right off there.
Hmm.
And the thing about that collection, which has like 1,300, no, 10,300 pieces of music on it, marches, overtures, all kinds of stuff. It's free. You can download the whole arrangement, all parts for nothing.
Hmm.
And it comes from a great, great band fan and historian named Bob Hogue, who amassed this huge collection of music and recorded about, oh, I don't know, I forget how many recordings he made, but he recorded hundreds of records of this stuff.
Hmm.
So, it's not like you got to go spend money or go to some library somewhere. This stuff is already available right on that Robert Home Music Collection site.
Yeah, well, thanks for telling us about that. I know I've accessed the just for the listeners, I've accessed that for a lot of our different concerts that we're running. Just because we're playing some historical pieces, and that's the way you can start investigating these pieces.
Yeah.
Go right.
By the way, that collection also has the recordings he made of those pieces
Hmm.
on there, so you can look at the
Yeah,
music and hear the recording at the same
yeah,
time.
and see what they did. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one question I had is, and you brought this up with Sousa because I think I've been told what the reason, well, not the reason, but more of what they did after. But a lot of the marches don't have any markings at all, or like the pieces, like I think for a second, like John Philip Sousa, when he would have a concert, you go and look at his march, and the way he performed them looks totally different than what's actually on the page.
Well, that
And,
goes back to competition.
oh, okay.
Sousa was a businessman. He had
Hmm.
a business band. His band was there to make money.
Hmm.
So therefore, when he played his marches, he played them differently than the parts just because people knew and heard that by Sousa. And it's so much better and different than the way the pedestrian bands played that same music.
Very interesting.
So it's sort of like a signature or a character.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, oh, I don't know, let me say, Frank Sinatra singing uh, an old ballad versus somebody today singing the same ballad. It's just not
Right.
the same. Same
Right.
music, same words, but it's just not the same.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to that artistry, and because if I'm not mistaken, I know he didn't record. John Philip Sousa did not record a lot of his pieces either. he wouldn't, he didn't really necessarily want that. And I mean,
There are recordings of his pieces by his band, but they were almost all conducted by somebody else.
Very interesting.
And they were played from the parts and not the way they were played in concert.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, because and I don't remember the name, but I believe one of his I know for percussion, I forget his name, was one of his.
August Helmica.
There you go. Wasn't he the one that kind of started writing some of this down? And
Yeah,
I know that's kind of what trickulated into some of the
yeah,
newer versions of his marches that are out there,
yeah,
that they've
yeah.
released. So, I mean, it's really interesting to think about that. And I think like, it's that question of when you're reading a book, right? Or you're reading and you have the words in front of you of what you get out of it compared to what somebody else will get out of it. And I think that's like, and I think about that with music. Like you're looking at the parts, but like what you're going to do that to make that more musical than someone else, right?
And then see, here's another idea.
Hmm.
Example: all accents are not created equally. An accent in a march is entirely different than an accent in an overture or a waltz
Yeah.
or a tone poem or a solo.
Okay.
In marches, accents are made to be pushed out to the people rather than a little nuance on a piece of note or something.
Right.
And a fortissimo in a march is different than a fortissimo in a Tchaikovsky symphony.
Hmm.
And it's not because they were outdoors. It's even in the concert hall. A fortissimo is a really more vibrant and intense sound than it is a loud sound.
Okay.
So once again, we get back to the question of, does this director have the musicianship to
Hmm.
properly interpret the music that the man wrote?
Hmm. Yep.
And so there is the source. It's sort of like a cook.
Hmm.
If Molly is 9 years old and cooks dinner, it's different than Grandma who cooks dinner too.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
and one other thing too is, this is another thing that might offend some people, but so what? People who graduate from music schools, conservatories or colleges, whatever,
Hmm.
once they get the diploma and a job, then their learning begins.
Hmm. Yep.
And they have to widen their horizons musically and develop their acuity of interpretation and understanding what music's all about, and fine tune it continually until the day that the undertaker says, let's embalm him.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you bring up a good point because I think we get, and I will say this as as a teacher and a conductor and stuff. I think we get lost in we have these, the colleges teach us those adequate skills, right? And we learn about, pieces and marches. And then it's like I feel like we got to expand ourselves and learn and research them and pull them apart. And just like you said, like figure out what the title means and try to figure out what sounds in the piece because just like every composer, I mean, goodness gracious, you learn about, go up the street. What is that going to sound like,
There's another trick that I just remembered. Some marches that are more likely to be military in style,
Hmm.
the first time through the trio, when the band is playing at a subdued level,
Hmm.
stick a field drum in there with the snare, not just snare, field drum with that big,
Right.
deeper snare drum sound, because that's the way you get tone quality difference in the percussion.
Right.
And then the other thing is the controversy about which is better. Back in the days, pre-World War II, the bass drummer had a cymbal attached to his bass drum,
Mhm.
and he played the cymbal with the other hand while he was hitting the bass drum.
Mhm.
Today, the cymbal player plays the cymbals and the bass drummer plays the bass drum, and there the two shall meet.
Hmm.
And the difference is when the bass drummer played the cymbal on the drum, the zing was more in tempo and in tune and
Hmm.
less interruptive.
Right.
Like it wasn't a crash. It was more
Right.
like a zing.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's what you need. So there again, it's musicianship and knowledge of the style that really
Hmm.
is the key to getting really good performance going.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And if you want to learn how to do all that, talk to Josh Long and he'll teach you.
I'm only still a student of music. I
Look,
say.
aren't we all?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
I know, like I'm even as you're sitting here talking this, I just wanted to share this with you. Like we have our two concerts coming up, and I've started some of my score study, and those kind of things. But man, do I want to rip into them, because it's like I want the concerts to have a different feel of what the music is rather than just playing the charts and that's it and moving on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Each piece of music has to be played so that the audience hears its personality.
Hmm. Yep.
I mean, you can't play a series of four numbers like a first year student band would, so that
Right.
each one has different tunes but sounds the same.
Yep. Hmm.
And it's uh it's just the kind of thing that sort of depletes our audience if we're not careful and cognizant of
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And there's a guy in Washington D.C. named Laura Schissel.
Hmm.
He about 20 years ago started a band called the Virginia Grand Military Band,
Hmm.
and it's populated by retired people from the service bands there. And he draws big crowds because his programming and his performance style emulates the good old concerts rather
Hmm.
than the contemporary ones where no not one piece in the program is familiar at all to anybody.
Right. Right.
You know, and who cares? I mean, there's such a thing called computer music,
Right. Hmm.
and you don't want people sitting in their seats to sound like a computer.
Right. Hmm. Yep.
I mean,
I understand.
it's it's artistry and musicianship. I mean, they're the
Yep.
keys. If those two bedrocks are not part of your foundation, you got to get yourself going and learn some more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Well, one question I had for you, and this is kind of going a little bit back to what you were talking about the concert march compared to the regular march, and sometimes we hear these words symphonic march. We hear that. Is in your opinion, and the research that you've done, and obviously performing them, is there any difference between the three? As far as that, I mean, like, and other than the words, I mean, I know obviously concert, you're bringing it in from the street. I get that. But is there any, did you find anything, anything different? I guess that's
Well,
if it's a concert or a symphonic march, I guess, compared to a regular march.
most of the time in the beginning, concert marches were published as concert march versions of the old quick step marches.
Okay. Okay. Hmm.
And that was because the word concert was in there and that would sell.
Okay. Okay.
Symphonic marches mainly are marches written as original marches contemporarily so that they were meant to be played indoors and have no connection to the old quick step style.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example of one of those. Jerry Billick, who graduated from the University of Michigan,
Hmm.
wrote a march up there called Block M.
Okay. Hmm.
And that march is a symphonic march, even though its style is definitely the old school march style.
Okay.
And that's because he does some stuff with the percussion and with the melodies and stuff that you really didn't do back then, even though it's in the march style. So, you know, it's sort of like, what's the difference between Honorable John, uh, Reverend John, and good old John? It's all John.
Hmm.
The appellation, the original word before that,
Hmm.
sort of like denotes something about John, but it really doesn't change John much.
Right. Okay. Hmm.
So, you know, a march is a march. It's in duple meter, and um, that's the bedrock from which everything flows. I've never seen a march called March Legato, you know, or the smoothie, a symphonic march. You know, uh, even the simple marches like those by John Kenyon or some of those other really easy piece composers are meant to be played with that march style, you know,
Hmm.
which is harder to do with the younger kids, but I mean, still, that's the intent.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, because we throw that term around, and I thought I would just bring it terms, I should say. We throw those terms around, and I thought I'd bring it up just because I feel like we're taking the whole point of this is to talk about marches of how important they are for band history, but also how you can do so much more for them. And I think sometimes like they tack those other words on there to make it feel
yeah.
that way, you know?
What you just said is an unreasonable limitation.
Hmm.
Marches are not just important for band history; they're important to be played so that the audience can enjoy them, and they deserve to enjoy them because they are such a unique form of musical expression emulated by no other form at all. And as a matter of fact, the last movement, the fourth movement of Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique is a march, the
Hmm.
scaffold, but it's still a march.
Yep.
And so marches are used in all kinds of different ways. Um, for instance, March from a Symphonic Metamorphosis
Hmm.
is a really good march too. But see, they're different than the Sousa style.
Right. Right.
So it's not how you build your house, but what you fill it with that makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, awesome. Well, I appreciate this because you bring up a lot of great comments about marches, especially how you can think of them as being, more than just a people mover, right? As you said from the beginning. So as kind of as we're wrapping this up, and
Right.
thinking about it, what do you see? Um, and I agree with you. What do you see we can do kind of about this other than just say, let's play more marches? What would you suggest as far as, as we're moving forward with, this kind of either putting the marches on I call it like a nonstop play or something that you just play, you know what I mean? And not
Uh,
really think through.
Number one, in a very gentle, supportive way, talk to the directors that you come in contact with about marches and how to play them.
Hmm.
For example, the Ringgold Band has a march book full of nothing but alt house marches, which
Hmm.
he wrote when he was director of the Ringgold Band. Those people up there know how to play it because they're schooled in that.
Hmm.
So the other thing that can be done is find really good recordings, well played, accurately played, to share with people
Hmm.
because a picture or a sound picture is worth 1,000 notes.
Hmm.
And you can describe it like I've done here, and it might do some good, but unless you actually hear what we're talking about, once again, it's like describing a wonderful woman without the picture.
Hmm. Yep.
So, and you've got to make a real point about doing that too, because you're only going to come in be, come in contact with a small number of directors.
Right.
What you need to do is get them involved, and then they go out and talk and stuff. I mean, let's face it. No college would hire us to teach that
Yep. Hmm.
because it's counter to the current culture.
Hmm. Yep.
Oh my, we just worry about symphonic music written originally for wind ensemble.
Hmm. Yep.
Well, guess what? A wind ensemble can play a march correctly just as well as a band.
Yep. Hmm.
Because a wind ensemble is nothing but a band with a fancy term.
Hmm.
As
Right.
a matter of fact, Bob Ho used to call them windy assemblies.
Very interesting. Well, hey, Bill, you bring up a great point about marches, and like I said, I thank you so much for being here. Again, I will say again,
Well, thank you
just
for enduring me.
yeah, definitely, and thank you for bringing up, your words and your wisdoms and your thoughts about this, because I truly believe, as we move forward, with playing and playing marches, we should definitely really spend time with them. I think that's the first thing.
Another thing too is that those directors who know how to play a march in training their bandsmen to play it accurately, they therefore will then know what a march is all about as well.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and I think you made one comment. It's just something I thought of when you were saying that. It's like if you're kind of stuck into what your band director or what you've heard or performed before, you know, that could help. I mean, we want to expand our minds, definitely, right? And move beyond just what we've played before. But what I'm trying to say is like take that time to learn those, like what they might have done with the marches that and carry that forward because that's a good starting place too. You know what I mean? Like getting those ideas and the musicianship and the artistry because I feel that could
Yeah.
definitely really
Yeah. Well,
help.
for example,
Yeah.
Susan
Hmm.
wrote a whole bunch of marches. Thunderer, Washington Post, and Stars and Stripes and Semper Fidelis are all household names. But nobody hardly ever plays Keeping Step with the Union or Solid Men to the Front
Hmm.
or uh, Corps Cadets or La Flor de Seville. Those are all fine marches, and nobody knows them because nobody ever hears them.
Right.
So you've got to explore the repertoire and find recordings of these things so you know what they're all about.
Yep.
If you want to play Sousa, fine, but try and find a different Sousa that you can work on rather than, oh, let's just play Semper Fi.
Yep. Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I know. I think you brought us up in our last podcast. You said, a composer's name, so this would be right here. Look them up, see what
Yeah.
other pieces they wrote. You know what I mean? And listen to them because you'll get quite a bit out of it. So, all right. Well, hey, thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate
You're
you
welcome.
and thanks for being here.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot.